This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to China Global Television Network. This is The World Today. I'm Mahia Mutua in Nairobi. Here are your top stories. Tensions rise in Ethiopia amid diplomatic initiatives to de-escalate the civil war. Sudan inches closer to getting a civilian government with the release of ministers from the previous administration. And the focus turns to youth representation at the ongoing UN Climate Conference. Thousands of Ethiopians have filled a stadium in the capital, Addis Ababa, to show their support for new military recruits. The event came as Ethiopia's government called on citizens to defend themselves against the advancing rebel fighters from the Tigray region. The year-long war has killed thousands of people and displaced millions since November last year. The government declared a national state of emergency on Tuesday. In her address to the crowd, Addis Ababa Mayor Adanechi Abebe says there is no victory without sacrifice.
Let's all be organized, guarding our environment, guarding the neighborhood, the police and the defense forces. Work day and night. Don't get tired. We are not allowed to get tired at this critical time.
Well, CGTN's Girum Chala now joins us with the latest from Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa. Girum, what's the situation like in the Ethiopian capital, and is there a sense of unease?
Well, Maya, today is the fourth day of the nationwide state of emergency since it was declared, and activities in the city remain to be calm. Normal activities you see on the streets, government workers, civil servants are going to their work. Everyone is doing their normal jobs. As we have reported yesterday as well, we've seen checkpoints here and there, not really serious, but police ask you questions. This is as per the terms and conditions of the state of emergency itself. But unless and otherwise, this is the case. And also, the government has asked citizens of the city to register any rifles or guns they possess, so that they know who has what, and people are going to police stations to do that. Unless and otherwise, this can be mentioned as perhaps a different activity in the city. We can report that in Addis Ababa, an activity that is being done by the citizens remains to be the same pre the state of emergency, and even there is no tension, there is no insecurity in the city.
And Girum, as we've been hearing, TPLF rebels have been making advances from the north. How then is the Ethiopian army responding to this threat, and what strategies are we likely to see being deployed there?
Maya, first of all, the advancement of TPLF force to the two most strategic locations or towns, Desse and Kombolcha, has been very for many people in Ethiopia, especially those here in Addis Ababa, saying that TPLF has made advancements and this could come to the capital city as well. And this is what diplomats have been waiting. That's why you've seen or heard of different security alerts come from the United States Embassy and the others. But now there is a retaliatory measure being taken. That's according to the ENDF source that we have at the battlefield of the two towns, Kombolcha and Desse. There is an active war going on now. ENDF is reporting of gains, and unverified reports are also saying that perhaps in the next hours or even days, they might be able to chase TPLF force away from Kombolcha city. But this is not verified yet. But TPLF, on the other hand, is saying that they are gaining more lands even, and they are still strong in Kombolcha and Desse towns. We have to wait and see, Mahia, as this is a delicate situation, as war is also continuing, what's going to be the result. But for now, we know that the conflict has continued, and the armed struggle from the ANDF side against the TPLF has also been strengthened.
All right, thank you very much for those updates. CGTN's Girum Chala there in Addis Ababa. Staying in the region, Sudan's military chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan has ordered the release of 4 detained civilian ministers. It is, however, unclear when that'll happen. Burhan's decision comes after a phone call with UN Chief Antonio Guterres calling for a democratic transition. Reuters reports that a source close to Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok says there has been progress in talks between the deposed leader and the army. Meanwhile, after the military removed barricades, tribal protesters lifted a weeks-long blockade on seaport and oil pipelines. Well, CGTN's Naba Mohideen joins us live now with the latest from Khartoum, Sudan. Naba, what's the latest on efforts to form a consensus government there in Sudan?
Actually, there is a lot of efforts, and the last effort was made by South Sudan government. A delegation came to Khartoum and made a lot of calls between different parts, military generals, political parties, and they tried to make a rapprochement between them. But it seems like there is no progressing in this file or in this issue, because still people are hearing that the formation of the government is soon. And Sudan TV said, some reports in Sudan TV said a sovereign council may be formed soon, but there is no confirmed news that Hamdok will be back, or there is any a middle area between the generals or Hamdok or political parties. It seems like there is a deadlock right now. We hear that the sovereign council may be announced today, and the government will probably be announced by Sunday. But nobody knows that it will be with generals' point of view of formation the government without Hamdok, or they will make an agreement. It seems like there is a lot of things under the table, and people, they don't know about it.
And Naba, what do we know about the status of the ousted officials who are still in detention, and do we expect more to be released?
Yes, the news said the officials were released yesterday, but their families confirmed that they didn't reach their homes last night. So there is conflicting news about them, and there is also news that 3 officials were arrested also last night. So it's not confirmed whether these news were to diffuse the public opinion about negotiating with Hamdok, because this was one of Hamdok's conditions to negotiate with the military generals to release the ousted government or ousted politicians. But nobody knows this is real news or not, because their families confirmed that they didn't see them last night. And at the same time, there is a lot of news, and some sources confirmed that 3 officials were arrested too.
Naba Mohideen, thank you very much for speaking to us on Africa on the show. Naba joining us live there from Khartoum. And moving on, Chinese President Xi Jinping has held phone call talks with Syrian President Bashar al-Assad and the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern. We will, of course, bring you more on that later on. Now, the UN's COP26 climate conference is turning its focus to youth and public empowerment on Friday. This week, the summit in Glasgow has heard renewed pledges from world leaders to stem climate change. Some youth campaigners have expressed their skepticism and anger at the proceedings, saying little will result from the meetings. For more on this, let's now cross live to John Bever, standing by in Glasgow. John, the voice from the youth is getting the spotlight this Friday at the UN Climate Summit. What more can you tell us about this?
Yeah, well, absolutely. We're expecting somewhere in the region of 8,000 and 10,000 people at a youth protest march here in Glasgow today. Many of them are angry that the promises being made here are not doing enough, and they're not happening quick enough. So, for example, all this talk earlier in the week that we were hearing about deforestation, well, they say the goals need to be much sooner. We need to be ending deforestation now. We need to not be talking about ending deforestation in 5 or 10 years. And they argue they are the ones who are going to have to deal with the major impacts of climate change over the coming years as they get older. And they've been saying that what needs to happen is change, and it needs to happen now, and we need firm promises. I've seen signs this morning saying action, not talk. It's that message that they're trying to get across to world leaders and these negotiating teams who are locked away in the summit venue behind me, trying to come up with firm policy ideas.
And John, what kind of interventions then are being fronted by the youth globally to fast-track sustainable climate change mitigation efforts?
Well, they are making their voices heard. They argue that that is the best way, by attracting this media attention. The fact that I'm here now talking about it to you and everybody watching is a major victory for all involved. All of the major news networks here are covering this. Expect to see these pictures around the world today. So that, of course, is huge. We've also been hearing actually from the UK's education minister, and they have put forward a policy where they are going to make studying climate change and the impact that you can have personally upon the planet, that is going to be a much bigger part of the school curriculum going forward. They're going to be building nature reserves in many schools and trying to get children interested and caring about the planet from a very early age. So we're going to see more of that happening here. We're already seeing that starting to happen around the world, so expect that to be accelerated. But yes, we've going to have thousands and thousands of young people here today, all of them trying to get across this message that they want change and they want it now.
All right, John, thank you very much for speaking to us. John Bever joining us live there from Glasgow on the sidelines of the COP26 Climate Summit. Well, China has launched a satellite into orbit for the UN's 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. It is the very first satellite tasked with monitoring our planet's progress on the agenda, focused on solving social and environmental problems. The satellite is equipped with thermal, infrared, low light and multispectral cameras to observe environmental changes caused by human activity. It will keep an eye out for urbanization, energy use and the state of our coastal ecosystems. And that's it for this edition of The World Today. I'll be back shortly with more news from the continent in Africa Live. Thanks for watching.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Ethiopians heed call to enlist in the army amid diplomatic initiatives to de-escalate the civil war. Sudan inches closer to getting a civilian government with the release of ministers from the previous administration. And we look at how stories about the experience of migrants are inspiring artistic expression. Hello and welcome to Africa Live, only on CGTN. I'm Mahia Mutua in Nairobi. Also coming up this hour, South Africa's ruling party, the ANC, in historical low performance after municipal elections. And in sports, Cameroon legend Roger Milla says his country is ready to host next year's Africa Cup of Nations. Welcome to the program. Now, thousands of Ethiopians have filled a stadium in the capital Addis Ababa to show their support for new military recruits. The event came as Ethiopia's government urged citizens to defend themselves against advancing rebel fighters from the Tigray region. The year-long war has killed thousands of people and displaced millions since November 2020. The government declared a national state of emergency on Tuesday. In her address to the crowd, Addis Ababa Mayor Adanechi Abebe says there is no victory without sacrifice.
Let's all be organized, guarding our environment, guarding the neighborhood, the police and the defense forces. Work day and night. Don't get tired. We are not allowed to get tired at this critical time.
Meanwhile, Ethiopia's parliament has ratified the country's state of emergency by an overwhelming majority. The state of emergency will last for 6 months there. The government can impose a curfew, order citizens into military training, disrupt transport services and travel, as well as suspend licenses of media outlets and detain indefinitely anyone suspected of having links with a so-called terrorist group.
The leader of the command center that is spearheading the implementation of the state of emergency is the Army Chief of Staff, but it is stipulated that the command center is accountable to the Prime Minister according to Article 7, Sub-Article 2. Therefore, the Prime Minister is at the helm, following up and leading the command center because it is accountable to the Prime Minister.
Well, CGTN's Girum Chala is following the developments from Addis Ababa and joins us live now, as well as Michael Baleke, who is live for us in Kampala. Girum, I'll begin with you. The recruitment of citizens into the Ethiopian army is now kicking into high gear. Is a fully fledged civil war on the horizon there?
Well, Maya, I have tried to speak to experts, military officials, and also authorities here about any possibility of the war expanding to other parties. Perhaps, as you have said, any full-fledged civil war to come to the country because of the recruitments. But they said that that's not the issue here. The issue is here first. There is a clear and present danger that was posed from the TPLF side, and Ethiopia needs to win the war, as the Prime Minister promised, to keep the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the country. That is why we need the army to be strengthened. But the second and most important thing they have mentioned is Ethiopia's army, compared to what the number of it is very small, and it needs to be strengthened. Way before the war started, the Prime Minister has been calling for the strengthening of this army and the citizens to be part of it, to be enlisted, to go to training camps so that the Ethiopian army can be ready for any challenge that comes before it. This is way before the war. So in general terms, I don't think there is going to be a full-fledged civil war, and this is according to the experts as well. But then again, Ethiopia wants to strengthen its army. That's why these recruitments are happening, besides fighting the current battle in the north.
And Michael Baleke is also standing by for us in the Ugandan capital. Michael, Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni, we do know, is spearheading regional efforts to address the crisis in Ethiopia. What's the latest you can tell us on this?
Thank you, Mahia. Well, we have just learned from the President's press secretary that Mr. Museveni is in touch with the Ethiopian Prime Minister, Abiy Ahmed, on the ongoing situation and has expressed concern over the escalating crisis. And we also understand that President Museveni is disturbed by the negotiations, by the fact that negotiations are not taking place to reach a ceasefire. And that, the fact that the ceasefire has failed to take off. Recently, the Ethiopian Prime Minister, Abiy Ahmed, was in Uganda, that was in August, for a one-day working visit on the invitation of President Museveni. And we understand they had bilateral relations, bilateral talks, but that was at the height of the attacks in the Tigray region. Mr. Museveni has always blamed foreign interference being a problem for Africa, and he believes countries should be allowed to settle their own internal issues. But it looks like President Museveni is gathering some African leaders and to come up with a solution to silence the guns in Ethiopia. Mahia?
And Girum, coming back to you, what more can you tell us then about the mediation efforts inside Ethiopia, and is dialogue still on the table there?
First, the United Nations, through Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General at the European Union, through a statement, the United States also through a statement, and by sending its top diplomat, have asked both parties in the war to sit down for a negotiation and also resolve this current conflict through peaceful means. To answer your second question, because of what I said earlier of a diplomatic pressure, including from neighboring countries, you've mentioned President Yoweri Museveni's call for peace as well. IGAD is calling the same thing. The African Union Commission, through the Commission's chairperson, Musa Faki Mohammed, are asking the same question. So this diplomatic pressure for both parties, the TPLF and also the central government, to resolve it peacefully is going to, perhaps, to answer your second question, going to help perhaps bring peace to the country and for dialogue to be possible. But you must understand that the Ethiopian government has its official stand in this regard. It is saying that there is an internal methodology, internal dialogue that it is planning to stage, and TPLF, if it wants, it can be part of it. And I mean, if it respects the nation's constitution at the same time. So this diplomatic pressure, alongside what the government is planning, if they come together, yes, Mahia, dialogue could be possible.
Right. And finally, Michael, coming back to you, looking at the wider picture then, what options does the wider East African region have in crafting an intervention that could possibly lead to a ceasefire in Ethiopia?
Mahia, earlier when I spoke to State House here in Kampala, the press secretary told me that there's going to be an IGAD meeting hosted by Uganda, and we understand the situation in Sudan and Ethiopia will be on agenda. And since these two countries are both members of IGAD. And just a reminder that, you know, President Museveni is highly regarded, is a highly regarded figure in the Horn of Africa. He's respected for his vast experience in regional security. So you may be aware Uganda has been at the height and, you know, involved in the pacification of not just Somalia, but also South Sudan, the Central African Republic, but also previously the DR Congo, Rwanda and Burundi. So there is some hope that key decisions may be made to silence the guns, not just in Ethiopia, but also return calm to the streets of Khartoum in Sudan. Mahia?
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much for speaking to us on Africa Live. CGTN's Girum Chala in Addis Ababa, as well as Michael Baleke joining us from Kampala, Uganda. Well, staying with this story, joining me now is Dr. Hassan Kanenje. He is the director of the Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies here in Nairobi, Kenya. Doctor, thank you for joining us. What are your thoughts about the unfolding situation in Ethiopia?
Despite this declaration of the state of emergency and a call for citizens to take up arms to defend their country, I think we are staring at a potential collapse of the government in the wake of very rapid advances, as well as increased alliances against the Abiy Ahmed administration. Second, I think we are looking at a potential very massive humanitarian crisis that we have not seen in this region in recent years.
Doctor, there is, of course, a drastic assessment. Are we likely then to see dialogue being given a chance there, or is an all-out civil war now inevitable?
Barring any serious external intervention, it's unlikely that we're going to see a dialogue by the parties themselves, in part because on the one hand, there's a rebel calculation of potential victory, especially in the wake of advances that they've been able to make towards trying to remove Abiy's administration. But secondly, there's also a calculation on the government side, or a desire to try and reclaim some of the battlefield advantages they've been able to lose or to cede to the rebels before perhaps any form of dialogue can be able to be initiated. And so, barring, again, any external intervention, it's unlikely we're going to see that.
And of course, there will be repercussions beyond Ethiopia's borders. What is the likely impact then of Ethiopia's crisis, both on the region and the wider continent?
Regionally, Ethiopia has been the seat, of course, of the African Union, but it's also one of the anchor states that's been critical in peace and security in the region. And so its absence also means that those aspects are going to be affected, including efforts to stabilize Somalia, as well as counterterrorism efforts that are critical, especially in trying to get rid of international terror. Also, there is a danger of proliferation of small arms and light weapons, as well as, of course, a potential humanitarian catastrophe that may affect not just countries neighboring Ethiopia, but countries in much of the continent, pushing refugees probably all the way to Europe and elsewhere. And so it is a matter, I think, of urgency that action is taken now and not later.
All right, Doctor, thank you very much for speaking to us. Dr. Hassan Kanenje, Director with the Horn Institute, joining us live here in Nairobi. Well, turning to the political crisis in Sudan, a source close to the country's Prime Minister, Abdallah Hamdok, says there is progress in talks between the deposed leader and the military. And UN Chief Antonio Guterres is urging Sudan to restore the civilian-led transitional government. For the latest on this, let's now go live to Naba Mohideen, who joins us from Khartoum. Naba, talks to have a civilian-led government in Sudan do appear at this time to be progressing well. What more can you tell us about this?
Yes, there is some news said a sovereign council may be formed soon, led by Burhan, and will join some military generals and civilians, just like the ousted sovereign council. Actually, Burhan's endeavors and ousted government endeavors are the same, to form a civilian-led government. The only difference is how to do it and who is mandated to do it. So, in a phone call yesterday, Burhan was in a phone call with the U.S. foreign minister, and he urged him to form the government very soon because U.S. is supporting Sudanese people goals, and Sudanese people's looking for formation of the government. And Burhan assured that he will form a civilian-led government, whether with Hamdok or not, due to some sources told CGTN. So I don't think there is a progressing between the military generals and the political parties, because the last delegation has just South Sudan delegation just left Sudan yesterday without telling anything about any rapprochement between the parties. So we think that we may see unrest very soon, because the generals are insisting on forming the government, because there is a political gap and constitutional gap that adds more fragile sense in the situation in Sudan.
And now, but talking in terms of a time frame, how soon then can we expect the formation of the government there, and is it still likely to be led by the ousted Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok?
Some sources said the Sovereign Council may be announced today, and and Minister's Council may be formed by Sunday. And there is 3 names, probably will be named or nominated as a Prime Minister. It's very difficult to expect that Hamdok will be back or not, because all of the talks between the generals and the political parties reached a deadlock. And at the same time, a lot of countries, including US and EU envoys and AU, are urging the government, the military, to form the government very soon. In the same time, there is no progressing in the talks due to our sources. But it seems like it will be formed in few days, because the situation, as I said before, it's already people are suffering, and there is escalation on ground, and there is an absence of government, and there is, of course, absence of security sense. So we may hear some names of Sovereign Council by the end of the day, and a new government formed by Sunday.
All right, Naba, thank you very much for keeping us updated. Naba Muhyiddin joining us live there from Khartoum. Well, it's time for us to take a short break. Here's what's coming up. South Africa's ruling party, the ANC, in historic low performance after municipal elections. And we look at how stories about the experience of migrants are inspiring artistic expression. Welcome back. Now, the World Health Organization warns that 500,000 people in Europe and Central Asia may die of COVID-19 by February. The WHO Director for Europe, Hans Klug, says the region is once again the epicenter of the pandemic. The WHO statistics show the region registered 1.8 million cases last week and 24,000 more deaths. Klug says only 47% of people in Europe are fully vaccinated. He says authorities must speed up the pace of vaccine rollouts, and the region's alarming situation should push everyone to act. In South Africa, the ruling ANC party has received 46% of votes in the country's local elections. Analysts have described this as the worst election outcome since the party took power at the end of apartheid in 1994. The party has been steadily losing support following repeated corruption scandals and poor basic service delivery in ANC strongholds. The final count was released on Thursday. Out of the 213 municipalities that were contested, the African National Congress achieved a majority of 161. Figures from the Electoral Commission put the ANC's biggest rival, the Democratic Alliance, second with 22% of the vote, and the Economic Freedom Fighters came third with 10%.
One-party domination is coming to a swift end across the length and breadth of South Africa, and we need to be able to take advantage of that going into the next election. So the road to 2024 starts today. We commit ourselves to being part of a new majority in South Africa that's going to be able to start building towards a better future for South Africa.
We have emerged as a victorious party, majority party, with not a decisive victory in all the metros. So it tells a story that ANC from the voters are saying to us, we have a decisive victory.
Well, joining me now is Dr. Emmanuel Matambo, political analyst with the University of Johannesburg. Doctor, what is the significance of these local election results, particularly for the ANC?
Thank you very much for inviting me. Well, this is a very significant moment for the African National Congress because it is the first time since 1996 when local government elections were established in South Africa that the ANC has fallen under the 50% threshold. So what this means now is that the ANC will have to look around and see which parties it can collaborate with so that it can have a lot of sway in the municipalities of South Africa. So that is of significance to South Africa and the ANC. On top of that, this is actually a lesson to the African National Congress that despite having changed the leadership from the 9 wasted years of Jacob Zuma, as Ramaphosa characterized them, that the people are not yet sold to the message of reform and the new dawn that President Ramaphosa announced, despite him obviously being more popular than the African National Congress itself. So this is a time for introspection, and this is a time for humility as well, because for a long time, the African National Congress was very complacent. I remember in the mid-2000s, one of their leaders even said that the party would rule the country until Jesus Christ came. This, of course, seems not to be the case, judging from the low turnout of the voters and, of course, the ANC dipping below the 50% threshold.
And Doctor, is it possible then that we're seeing the end of one-party political dominance in South Africa?
This depends with how the ANC will collaborate with other smaller parties. But ideally, obviously, we would estimate that this is really the end or the beginning of the end of the ANC's dominance over South African politics. Because if smaller parties collaborate with the ANC, they will have to keep in mind that this is a party that is growing increasingly unpopular, and so collaborating or building coalitions with it might actually be costly to the electoral prospect of ambitious smaller parties.
All right, Doctor, thank you very much for speaking to us. Political analyst Dr. Emmanuel Matambo there. Moving on, the Chinese embassy in Zambia has handed over about 3,000 tons of maize to Zambia's government. The maize has been donated by the Chinese government. The food will be distributed to vulnerable families across the nation by the Disaster Management and Mitigation Unit in the country. Zambia's Minister of Finance and National Planning says he is delighted by the support offered by the Chinese government to the people of Zambia. He also applauded China for the unwavering support that China has demonstrated towards Zambia in times of adversity. Zambia has in recent years experienced severe cases of the impact of climate change and global warming, leading to food shortage, among other calamities.
There are households, there are families who did not harvest properly, last year, and they are vulnerable to food. So the donation that we received today will be given to those families who did not have a good harvest so that they can have a food.
We had the challenges in terms of food security. Though our situation has now improved, we still have pockets in districts where people still need assistance. And this donation of 3,099 metric tons of maize will go a long way to meet the needs of people in the rural areas.
Medics in Nigeria are sounding the alarm over the number of babies born with HIV and are appealing to pregnant women to enroll for antenatal care as a matter of priority. A recent report by Nigeria's AIDS and Sexually Transmitted Infections Control Program says over 3,000 babies born in the country in the past 4 years tested positive for HIV. Our correspondent Tesem Akende reports.
Godiya Nantip is 8 months pregnant and is undergoing antenatal care at this health center in Jos. She says she had to register early for antenatal care due to some complications she had in the early stages of her pregnancy.
After that 3 months, I started feeling some difficult. I cannot even walk at times. The way I used to do things, I cannot do it. So I encourage myself to come to the hospital to register for it. I know I didn't come. I could have faced a lot of challenges with the baby and even my health.
The United Nations Children's Fund says thousands of babies in Nigeria contract HIV because their mothers fail to enroll for antenatal care at health facilities. A 2020 report by the European Journal of Public Health says Nigeria accounts for about 10% of the HIV/AIDS burden worldwide and has the second highest incidence of new HIV infections among women after South Africa.
It's very, very important. Very, very important. In fact, it's only when they come, some of them, even those living in denial phases, if they come and we screen them because we do routine ANC screenings. So those ones, in fact, HIV screening is one of them. Most of them that, deliver, positive babies because they live in denial stages.
Health experts are calling on the government to focus on pregnant women who are HIV positive to prevent mother-to-child transmission of the disease.
We need further assistance from the government. The government needs to do more. In fact, the government needs to invest more in the health sector That's the truth. Because most of the assistance we even get comes from donors. And then this shouldn't just stop in urban centers. It has to go to the grassroots.
The government says it is now making maternal and child health a priority. The government has launched a plan to revitalize more than 10,000 health centers, especially in rural areas across the country. This is aimed at ensuring that at least 80% of pregnant women in the country attend at least 4 antenatal care visits before their expected dates of delivery and also deliver at health centers. The expectation is that more pregnant women like Godio Nante will enroll for antenatal care and early enough at health centers, thereby reducing the risk of mother-to-child transmission of HIV in Nigeria. Tessim Akende, CGTN, Jos, Nigeria.
Now, irregular migrants often go through untold difficulties as they seek a better life abroad. Some lose their lives as they attempt to cross the sea while traveling from Africa to Europe, and many others are deported after challenging journeys. The International Organization for Migration, IOM, recently brought some Nigerian returnees together to share their experience through art so as to educate people on the dangers of irregular migration. CGTN's Deji Bademosi has that story.
These are not just mere paintings, but graphic representations of what some of the returnee migrants went through in their attempt to migrate to Europe through the irregular routes of the Sahara Desert and the Mediterranean Sea crossings in North Africa. They're using art to tell their stories before a select audience of young people who are among the most vulnerable groups that are susceptible to human trafficking. Amirat Ibrahim shared her near-death experience in her attempt to migrate to Europe a few years ago. This painting shows how they were loaded onto a van driven for several days through the Sahara Desert on their way to Libya, where they had planned to cross the Mediterranean Sea into Italy. But the traffickers would later abandon them in the middle of nowhere in the desert.
This is my present self crying, my head up, and this is the people that though we are much than this, but this is just the one I can put down. This is what it's all about in the desert. So my advice for people out there that want to travel irregularly, some died in the desert, some can't meet up the other day, they died. So my little advice for them is if they want to travel, someone should come and meet them that, okay, before 2 months or 3 months, you'll be sending money to your family. It's a pure lie.
Her story is similar to that of Jeremiah Adelu, who showed the audience paintings of the various abuses he suffered in Libya in his aborted dream to make it to Germany.
So if you take a close look at these pics, you see that this man is in the prison. There was nobody he can run to. There's nobody he wants to call. Even at that stage, they gave him water, they gave him food. He could not eat because of the dangers he was facing over there. So he's just sending a picture because words cannot be able to express everything that, that happened to us via the route. But we can use pictures to represent these things so that people can begin to see what we've seen and believe what we are saying, and to know that irregular migration is a suicide mission.
Organizers are hoping this initiative will help some of the returnees in their process of rehabilitation and healing. The returnees have been co-opted into the IOM Migrant to Messenger campaign to end irregular migration and trafficking.
And the main objective of the project is to empower returned migrants, whom we call volunteer messengers with a different skill set, so that they can be able to sensitize their peers. We use the peer-to-peer advocacy approach as a way of sensitization, whereby they gather stories, including even what you've been able to see today, whereby they depict their stories through art as a way of reaching out to the different target audience in terms of sensitizing them on the issues of irregular migration, on the issues of trafficking in persons, including smuggling of migrants, and this they are doing by sharing their journey and life experiences when they embark on the irregular journey.
Nigeria has a serious human trafficking challenge and is dealing with a wave of irregular migration among young people. Apart from the IOM, the country is also counting on these returned migrants to help spread the message on the dangers of irregular migration. Deji Bademasi, CGTN, Lagos.
Right, and still ahead on the business. We continue our coverage of the China International Import Expo.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climate and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Right, well, it's time for the business, and the 4th China International Import Expo is underway in Shanghai. At this year's event, 80% of the Fortune 500 companies and other industry giants are returning exhibitors. One of them is global fashion conglomerate Inditex. Our reporter Chen Tong sat down with the company's China head to learn about their operations.
So it's actually the second year Inditex attends the China International Import Expo. What brought you back?
For us, the most appreciated value of the CII is not only deal making, but also to enjoy an excellent space for global participants to have in-depth exchanges. You know, we got the opportunity of analyzing market trends, but also of knowing deeper our stakeholders and partners' expectations. And that inspired all the Inditex family in China and abroad also, and further strengthen our confidence in the Chinese market.
China's fashion market is very competitive. For example, foreign giants like you and also domestic players are popping up. So how do you think of China's retail market at the current moment?
Certainly China is one of the key markets for Inditex, and we continue to see growth potential in it. And looking back, we began our activity in China in 2004 when we opened our first store in Hong Kong SAR. And we are currently operating in over 50 cities in the country and selling online through our own platforms as well as Tmall. I think we have a very clear objective: uninterruptedly service our customers in Chinese market on any device or at any time of the day. And the commitment of our more than 8,000 professionals in China and the support of our many partners in the country in so many aspects of our value chain are our cornerstone to satisfy our customers' demand of quality and ethical fashion.
And coming up in the sport,